Well, thank you. It's an honour to be here, and congratulations to Fernando on a really good book, which is going to push things along considerably in this area of research. Oh, Junior, here. Good. So just basically to do with the argument of the book, then it starts off, by looking at Operation Condor or Plan Condor, as Fernando points out, it should be called, and about the fact that it's essentially based upon a lie. That this was these security organisations and the military getting together to target the left, and their argument that they were specifically targeting the United Revolutionary Coordinating Junta that had formed in late 1975 was just a fraudulent proposition, because the left by that time, the armed left, was so weakened that it scarcely existed. The Condor really had nothing to do with that, and I think Fernando makes that case extremely strongly, and I think others have made that before to some extent, but Fernando pushes it forward much more. And so what was Condor about then? Condor was about the exiles. It was about targeting the exiles. Now, why the exiles? Was it because they were funding or supporting armed struggle in Latin America by the left? No, it was because the exiles had shifted the strategy, having realised that the armed struggle had basically failed, although of course we do have to remember that there is a success in 1979 in Nicaragua of the Sandinista Front of National Liberation. But, in South America, the armed left was not going anywhere. And the exiles then shifted their strategy to attacking the military dictatorships by pointing out what the military dictatorships were doing with regards to human rights. So the dictatorships then, responding to this, had to respond to this, and they responded in the way they had responded to date, which was to use violence themselves. So that was what Condor was about, and they would target people within South America, beyond South America, in the Americas, including in North America, and beyond that to Europe itself. So this was an international strategy that they had. And, they fought this very strongly, through violence, but also through their propaganda machines, such as they were, and, because they're backed by the United States, and their propaganda worked to a certain extent. And I remember here in 1983, 82, before the elections in Argentina, anyway, when the military was, having lost in the Malvinas, was in the process of handing power. The elections in 83. Yeah. So we're in the process of handing power back to the civilians. Then a gentleman from the Argentine embassy at this public meeting was still bringing out the line that there were no disappeared in Argentina, that these were people who had chosen to disappear themselves, who had gone on holiday, who had gone to Europe, and these people in exile who were saying that there were these disappearances, and these people were simply lying and trying to mislead the Australian people.
I remember particularly a campaign that they ran in 1978 when they had the international football. They were being accused of human rights violation, military government, and they ran a campaign by which cars were starting to display notices saying, "We are human and we are rust." Well, everybody was kind of, "Oh yes, we are." And people kind of stuck with it.
We come up with some good slogans sometimes, don't we? I remember in the south of the United States, I saw this enormous billboard, and it just said, "Get right or get left." All right. So this was. I mentioned the fact that Condor obviously had the support of people like Kissinger and the State Department in the United States and the CIA and during the Nixon years, certainly the presidency. And so these violations of human rights on the part of the military were glossed over, hidden, lied about. We can see this in client side, we didn't know about it at that time. Now, something that Fernando does in the book too, which is rather new, and which I was a bit doubtful about, was that he he argues he investigated the work of lay people, so not just the military, but the anti-communist fanatics. And he does this at the world scale, because these people have organisations, and as well as within the Southern Cone itself and Latin America in general. And I guess over time, I tended to think that these people were just idiots, and you just ignore them, really. They're people you have to put up with. But I take his point finally that yes, they have an important role to play. We're never too old to learn, are we? That they had an important role to play in supporting the military, and this is something that this is something that we do have to acknowledge, that there are a lot of people in Latin America, and it's not just the elites necessarily, who do support these sorts of dictatorships and were happy, supportive, and in the case of some of these people, complicit in the human rights violations of the military. And, I know in Argentina, I was there in '82, just after the Malvinas, and coming across people, you'd argue with these people. They would say there's no disappeared, it's all just a lie, and you keep pushing them, and I remember there's a couple of terrorists, actually, right-wing terrorists, and they said, those people deserved it anyway. So they ended up admitting it. They knew about it. Everybody knew about it. But there were a lot of people who just didn't want to acknowledge it. And, as Fernando was saying, there are people amongst these who were complicit in these crimes that were carried out. Now, the argument then, the argument is straightforward, it proceeds logically, it's extremely coherent, and it's based upon excellent research. So there's nothing, there's no reason not to read the book. Obviously everything is open to question, which is critical faculties and all of that, but this is a very good, solid, scholarly work. And it reads well, too. So, I've got no hesitation in recommending this to people. It's a big advance on the work on Condor today. Now, I just want to switch direction a little way and just put this in the context of Latin American studies. And history works in strange ways. It's not all, there are losses, but even with the losses, there's positives that can come out of it. And going back, if Latin Americans, this is, Jim knows more about this than I do, but, here we've got, well, we're barely living these days, Latin American studies, which started here in 73, Jim? 1973. And, why are people studying Latin America in Australia in 1973? And the answer to that is really Cuba in 1959. Because when Cuba happened, when that revolution is successful, the United States government gets very worried about Latin America. Now before that, it had its interventions in Guatemala and so on, that's all there. But really, they did regard it as their backyard. But suddenly, their backyard has exploded and there's a successful revolution. Which they find extremely threatening, as we know about the blockade against Cuba and the Bay of Peace and all of that sort of thing. But just as in Vietnam, the United States government realised, and their institutions, realised that they didn't know that much about these places. And so they needed to find out, as in Vietnam, when they're sending sociologists and historians and anthropologists over to Vietnam to investigate the people and find out what makes them tick so they can order them the way that they want them to be ordered, then they confront the same problem in Latin America. They realise they don't know that much about Latin America. And this is where you get the Alliance for Progress. So it's, on the one hand, of course, it's about funding the military and the security organisations in Latin America, but on another, it's sending down investigators of certain types. Now, obviously in the United States before this, there had been people doing Latin American history and so on, yes. But now, they start to get government funding in a big way, and they're Jim. And, young scholars like Jim, then, start this study of Latin America. And, for the US government, this is about finding out how to control these people and to stop revolution. But many of these investigators go down and investigate, and they find out something about the reality of Latin America, and many of them become radicalized. And so if you look at Latin American studies in the United States through the 1960s and into the 1970s, then we find a lot of these people are becoming very strong supporters of left-wing movements in Latin America. So they might have started off on the right, but their experience of Latin America turns them to the left. And so many of these scholars, then we could call them engaged. All right, so it doesn't mean to say that they're any less scholarly because they're engaged, but they start to take political positions with regard to Latin America. And, this has all sorts of repercussions, but this is what I mean about history being rather strange in its way, because something that starts off as a right-wing push from the United States ends up in producing scholars who are engaged to a greater or lesser extent with the left in Latin America. And, so we see this sort of twist happening with Condor as well, and with the military dictatorship, that people, Latin Americans driven into exile all over the place, then influence people in those countries that they're driven, where they're in exile. And so people then, you start to see, the case of Australians, and you start to see Australians getting radicalised by the Latin Americans who have come here as refugees or as exiles. And so, one of the things that I find heartening about this book, and looking around the table as well, is that, here we have, we go back to before the military dictatorship, the number of Latin Americans in Australia was very small. And, many of them, before, with the victory of Allende in Chile, many of those that came here before 73, then many of these were right-wing or not political at all. But there's this influx of Latin Americans off the left into places like Latin America. And I remember when Whitlam was thrown out of power, it was the Chileans that I recall, but I'm sure it's other Latin Americans, sort of Uruguayos and so on, who said, hey, this is a coup. Whereas us silly Australians are just saying, oh, no, that was in the Constitution. So we've learnt a lot. And I just find it very heartening now that we've got scholars coming through who are Latin American in Australia. And I just wish that the university system was in better shape than it is, because, with the corporate university and with the triumph of neoliberalism, then it's not as though there's that many full-time jobs around. But hopefully, as scholars come through, get their PhDs and so on, then they'll find jobs and they will educate people here in Australian universities. So I mean, that's really the big aim. I mean, that's what we want, and we'll see how that goes. So, just to conclude, just to finish up, it's a great book, and
thanks, Peter.
I'm very proud of Fernando, and I would say this, that Gunther and I, Gunther Mineral, who was the other supervisor, then, we never had any worries about Fernando. We always knew that he was going to produce this, and he talks about it being a long road, but it wasn't that long, in fact.
No.
He's a brilliant scholar, and it would be wonderful if he keeps on in this direction. He is an engaged scholar.